In October 2019, Natalie Dean loaded her 2 children into the car at their home in Odessa, Texas, and went out looking for her husband, Jacob. Hours earlier, Jacob, a contractor with a small oil company named Airborne Energy, had gone out to investigate a malfunctioning pump. Natalie became frightened when Jacob stopped answering his cell phone. When she arrived at the pump house, Jacob's truck was empty. She found Jacob inside the pump house, dead or dying of hydrogen sulfide poisoning, federal investigators later concluded. According to state reports, Natalie was on the phone with family members when she found him. As E&E News reported, her last words were, "Oh my God," before she, too, was killed by the poisonous fumes. Passers-by found their children, safe, in the car the next morning. The past decade has seen a staggering expansion of U.S. oil and gas production, with Texas at the forefront. State leaders have long held up the oil and gas business as a foundation of Texas prosperity.
We fuel the world here in the Permian Basin, and I've taken a lot of pride in doing my part at the state capitol to make sure that we continue to do that. It has so much to do with how we make our livelihood out here in West Texas.
But for many on its doorstep, in places such as Odessa and its sister city of Midland, the boom has come at a brutal cost. Millions of Texans now live exposed to old, failing wells, groundwater contamination, and airborne chemicals.
The more oil they produce, the gassier the formation is getting.
To the naked eye, it was a quiet scene.
There's a house.
In a field east of Midland, Odessa, an unlit flare, which was meant to burn off excess gas from the oil field, poked up from the ground.
We're breathing that.
Sharon Wilson's camera's viewfinder shows the infrared radiation thrown off by the gases, unburned methane vented into the atmosphere, along with toxic chemicals like benzene.
When they first started booming out here, it was 29% gas, and now it's 40%. So what they're having to do is, instead of just putting one flare on a site, they're having to put multiple flares on a site to handle all the gas that's...
Those fumes worry many residents who have fought to keep them away from their homes. When retired pastor Columbus Cooper and his wife bought their home in West Odessa, they knew that around the corner there were tanks holding spent fuel or fracking fluid. The couple wasn't worried. They'd lived their whole lives here in the heart of the Permian Basin, America's most productive oil field.
I didn't realize that there was no oversight and that there was no one, who was making sure that it was safe for us. And then it really came to light after the couple died a couple of years ago here. I started looking online and researching and learning more about H2S gas, and because I always just thought it was kind of just part of living near, drilling sites.
The conditions weren't what they expected, and a big part of that was the way that oil is extracted had changed dramatically in the U.S. Where it once was like sticking a straw into the ground and pumping up a lake of oil, extracting oil and gas in the Permian now usually means fracking. In that process, drillers pump a chemical cocktail into an existing oil well, or a new one, to shatter the rock surrounding the main shaft, quickly releasing a flood of trapped oil and gas. But along with that comes an enormous volume of wastewater, in fracking lingo, produced water, a combination of what goes down and additional water from inside the earth. And it comes back loaded with salt, benzene, heavy metals, or even radioactive isotopes. A 2016 EPA report showed that by itself, fracking rarely contaminates nearby water. Although that does happen, the problem is more what comes next. Like spills above ground, which can contaminate nearby sources. Texas lets drilling companies release their wastewater into rivers. To get rid of the wastewater after it's been used, many operators inject it back underground. But deep injection wells can cause damaging earthquakes.
Roughly 61 earthquakes impacted Abilene this morning, and the strongest one had a magnitude of 5.1. Emergency management in Abilene says that so far there have been roughly 30 reports of damage from residents in Scurry County, including broken windows and cracked walls.
You hear about them in California and other parts of the world, but West Texas, you don't think about that large of an earthquake.
So, in recent years, drilling companies have started using shallower injection wells, which causes a new problem: fracking fluid bursting from the state's old, failing, or forgotten oil and gas wells in what some observers have compared to a game of whack-a-mole.
Once the EPA informed me that Aghorn had been polluting our water, that's when it was absolutely no way we were going to be doing anything with the water company. We actually have 2 water wells.
Rancher Skylar White is frustrated with the oil and gas companies.
The industry keeps trying to make excuses and kick this down the road rather than...
The rights to drill on his land, which his grandparents sold to keep it, in a common Texas story, are now leased by an oil company that uses liquefied carbon dioxide to pull out more oil.
Together make carbonic acid.
Carbonic acid corrodes metal.
They've got H2S is hydrogen sulfide.
Every moment that the wells aren't capped raises the odds that their casing will crack, spilling chemicals above or below ground.
They've had people killed through the years, somebody here and there.
And many of them have lain open to the air for decades. Texas received federal funds in the 2022 bipartisan infrastructure bill to cap these zombie wells, but the future of all this funding is uncertain. The second Trump administration has sought to block Biden-era federal grants with any environmental tinge. With 240 old wells on his property, White has many such leaks. One of his parcels borders Lake Beamer, a 60-acre spill bubbling up from an abandoned oil well turned water well. The air there reeks of hydrogen sulfide, the same compound that took the lives of Jacob and Natalie Dean. White's biggest fear, he said, is that in a world shifting away from oil, there will be no more money for cleanup.
The oil industry is an industry of ups and downs, peaks and valleys. And some of these operators, when they get in the valleys, they're undercapitalized and they just go broke. And then they don't have there's really nothing they can do.
The deaths of Jacob and Natalie Dean happened during the first Trump administration. Years later, under Biden, the EPA and Justice Department filed criminal charges against Aghorn and 2 co-defendants for violating the Clean Air Act and Safe Drinking Water Act. Litigation lasted several more years, with an unsuccessful attempt by Aghorn to dismiss the case. 2 months into President Trump's second term, his Department of Justice settled with Aghorn. As of mid-March 2025, the terms of that settlement had not been announced to the general public.